So I guess we should get started then, Dave. We'll start a bit early. Um,
Absolutely.
oops. So my name is Sam. I'm a nurse practitioner with Niagara North Family Health Team.
And my name is Dave Griffiths. I'm a physiotherapist locally here in Niagara.
Perfect. So I'll just quickly talk about. So Dave and I first originally met. I was a patient of his. I had an injury that he helped me with. We became friends. And then I'm just going to quickly talk about kind of how this webinar came to being. So, like I said, Dave and I became friends, and during COVID, we were talking about not specific patients, but generalizations about some of the common things that we were seeing with patients, and a lot of it had to do with unhealthy behavior change that people were making. So, and I was guilty of it myself. For example, staying up late, not eating as healthy, not exercising as much, and things like that, and increased stress. So what we decided to do at that point is Dave and I said, hey, you know what? Let's do a podcast together. So we did a kind of a podcast series that talked about a lot of the stuff that we're going to touch on today. And we had some good feedback about that. And then we created a presentation about the same kind of information that we did in person. And again, that was well received. So now we have this opportunity to do a webinar. Um, I will say it's a lot of information that we're going to ram into 1 hour. So I apologize if it's a bit speedy. We do have some resources that will be available through Niagara North Family Health Team. I'm pretty sure we'll end up getting them on the website somehow, or we'll potentially email them to you. I'll figure out how we're going to do that. But that is available as well. Okay, so anything else to add before that, Dave? Oh, I guess
Just,
the style. Yeah.
just what we were going to say is Sam and I are currently in the same studio. So you may see us glancing back and forth and instead of staring at the camera. So we're actually organizing this like a conversational style
Mhm.
webinar. So we will be kind of talking with each other while also talking with you as well too.
Right on. Oh, and then I guess finally, because it's a lot of information that we want to ram in an hour, we are going to, at the end of each kind of section, we're going to split it up into sections. At the end of each section, we'll ask if there's any specific questions, and then also at the end. So if you were talking and something comes to mind, just jot it down, and then we will have a second for some questions. All right. So let's begin.
Well, let's do it.
Let's do this. Maybe. Bear with me. Sorry. Let's try that again.
It was just the anticipation,
Now we
just
will go.
building
All right.
anticipation.
So, as we're all aware, health is not just the absence of disease. It's also, a balance between your mind, your spirit, your body. Here's a definition from the World Health Organization. I'm sure we're all aware of this. So, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely, like I said, the absence of disease. And when we were doing this presentation slash webinar, this quote kind of from a book that I read in the past came to mind. And it's essentially, in the long run, the quality of our lives often depends on the quality of our habits. So essentially what that means is that if you want to change your life, you have to change your habits. It's like the old saying, the definition of insanity is if you keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. All right, so a couple other things we want to talk about before we move on is this is not intended at all to pass any judgment regarding your current behaviors or health status. Um, all of the topics that we're going to talk about today have been demonstrated to significantly impact the quality of life, mental health, risk for disease, and all-cause mortality. Okay. The recommendations and strategies that we discussed today, they are supported by scientific research, expert opinion, and or clinical experience, or tried and true things that we have found. Correct, Dave?
Correct. Yeah.
And finally, we just want to also make it completely clear that we do not endorse or recommend calorie counting or any restrictive diets. Not that we're going to be talking a lot about nutrition. It is one spot where we're going to skip a bit, just because there is a webinar specifically about nutrition. So we encourage you to sign up for that. And then the last thing, last thing before we get into the actual topics is the truth bomb. Essentially, you're responsible for your health. Okay. So we're going to talk to you about what we recommend, some strategies, but ultimately, at the end of the day, you're going to have to you know, apply these to your own life. And again, I understand that everybody's life is different. So not everything's going to apply, but you'll just have to see what works for you. All right. So today, like I mentioned, we're going to discuss some behaviors and habits that can negatively impact your physical and mental health. We're going to review recommendations and guidelines. We're going to discuss some simple, realistic, and applicable strategies to help with behavior change. And then we're going to examine one method of setting individual goals for behavior change. And I'm going to get a drink of water.
So motivation. Okay. So everybody needs a little bit of motivation to keep them along and tracking properly to reach their goals. Okay. There's a couple different styles of motivation that we'll get into. Okay. And they are in extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is something that you do for some sort of external value, right? So that could be, you know, working harder to make more money, doing something like that, right? Getting new house, new car, so forth. Okay. Whereas intrinsic motivation is doing something because you find it rewarding, right? So we have that internal sense of accomplishment or some sort of internal reward value.
That's right. And it's important to know that your personal motivation can evolve.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's natural that we do see like those, the motivations do change from time to time.
So yeah, so obviously motivation, it initiates or is the driving force behind your behavior change. Okay. It encourages persistence and it helps to make you resistant to your self-sabotage behaviors. That little voice in your shoulder that tells you, you know, oh, you know, you can skip that exercise today or eat that whole entire cake. Okay.
Although it is good sometimes.
It is. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Everything in
okay.
moderation. That's what
Yeah.
we preach.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess how do you find your motivation? That's always the question. Now, a lot of you probably have general ideas about what you're hoping to get out of this. But if you don't, then what I usually recommend is starting asking yourself this question. So, like, essentially, what is the one area of your health that you want to improve? And then once you've identified that, you want to write down some of the answers to some of these questions. So, for example, why is this goal important to you? How will you celebrate achieving it? What excites you about achieving your goals? And how will achieving your goals positively impact your life? And then you might ask, well, what do you do with all this stuff you've written down? Well, you keep it written down.
That is perfect. Everybody likes to write down or do something a little bit differently. Okay. But you know, where you have like points in your house or within your room or whatever you got, where you find like you might lose motivation, it's always good. We recommend that you kind of post it up there. Okay. So that could be like in front of your mirror, could be in your washroom, could be on fridge, whatever that might be.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can call it whatever you want. People call it a dream board, a motivational poster, whatever. And again, it doesn't have to be fancy like this. It can literally just be a piece of paper with a sentence, couple sentences on it.
2 words.
Exactly. So it just to serve as your visual reminder to, you know, remind you why you started and what is going to be the benefits or the what's the word I'm looking for? But your the success, like essentially of it. So like Dave mentioned, one of the recommendations for that is putting it in places where you may find that you're tempted to revert to old habits. So for example, if one of your goals is to stop eating junk food, you might want to put this a version of this kind of dream board in areas where you keep all your junk food, right? So
Actually like that one.
that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. 2 simple words on a piece of paper, attached right to like the drawer of the cabinet, right? Pretty good.
And it's not intended to shame you, because that's the thing. Like this is a difference between shaming and reminding, right? So this isn't to say, oh, you can't have those things. It's just to remind you that, yes, I'm on this mission to achieve this goal. That's essentially it.
Yep.
All right. The other thing that we don't recommend doing is telling anyone about your behavior change goal. Obviously, if you're the people that are in your immediate family, like, you know, a spouse or children or something who are going to be involved in it, you're going to need to tell them. But the reason we don't recommend that is, I'm sure you've heard this before, is that the actual goal itself acts as the motivation for working towards that goal. So what happens when you tell people is it tricks your brain into thinking that you have already accomplished the goal, and it reduces the feedback through the dopamine reward system, which is what kind of keeps us moving towards
Yeah.
these goals.
We'll talk about that quite a bit, right? The dopamine reward
Yes,
system, okay, and how these different aspects of health can play into that.
right on. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions? And I'm not sure if Alicia has to turn on people's mics for this, or if individuals can turn on their mics themselves, but does anyone have any specific questions about that part, the motivation?
The chat option is also there.
Oh, is it? Okay, perfect. I'm going to show that on the side there. Okay, perfect. Alicia, if you can let us know. Sorry, everyone. This is the first time Dave and I have ever done a webinar. If you can tell us if there's any questions, just because I can't see anything here, if you don't mind.
Know if
Thank
anything
you.
pops up.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Awesome. All right. So we're going to move on to the next step. If I can click the button here.
Moving forward.
All right, here we go. All right. So we're going to talk about behaviors and habits that can impact your health. All right.
Okay, so things that can negatively impact your physical and mental health are poor sleep, not getting enough sleep, or sleeping too much.
And I'm sure you're all aware of that. This is all common sense stuff.
Nutrition, obviously, bad nutrition, diets high in sugars, carbohydrates, things like that, not enough protein, that can be a factor. Again, we're not going to really touch on this. There'll
Yeah.
be more resources coming up later.
Yeah. Too much calories, not enough calories,
Yeah.
right?
So forth.
So
right?
I would recommend, if that's where you're struggling, I would recommend signing up for the nutrition webinar.
Yep. Physical activity, so not getting enough regular physical activity, or not incorporating what we call NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis.
Right.
Okay, which is just a fancy way for saying moving more.
That's right. And we'll touch a bit on that as
Yep,
well.
in a minute.
And then psychoactive substances, we're going to specifically talk about alcohol, nicotine, and or cannabis. But essentially what we're going to be talking about is excessive use or habitual use, right? So, and then similarly, social media. And this is kind of the same thing. We're going to touch on, because this is also just like psychoactive substances, social media is also involved in the dopamine reward system. So we're going to talk about habitual use of this again, or excessive use. It doesn't mean that you can't use it, just means that we don't recommend using it excessively. We're going to talk quickly about social and body comparisons as well. All right.
Okay, and each of these habits or behaviors are impacted and influence each other, right? So for instance, if you're not getting enough sleep, maybe you're going to be tired a little bit more, meaning you're less likely to be physically active. You maybe eat a little bit more carbohydrates, weight goes up, so forth. Okay, so all of these things impact each other, and there is importance to how one plays to each other.
That's right. And like we mentioned, they all do significantly impact all aspects of your life. Okay. So, and here's some examples. Some examples would be obviously, all of these things. So sleep, exercise, they all influence your appetite, like Dave just mentioned. They influence your sleep, things like that. Okay. They can influence your mood and influence your risk for cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline,
Yeah.
blood pressure, all those things.
And if they start becoming more habitual, right, over a long term, they can impact longevity, overall health for like the long term
That's right.
aspect of it, right?
And-
So these things we want to watch for.
Yeah, and I mean, and essentially we could do an entire hour-long webinar on just this
yeah.
aspect of it. So,
Yeah.
But I think we all understand that that's the case, that poor habits impact our health in these ways.
So once you start having those bad habits, it's kind of hard to break out of things. So that's what we're trying to do, is come up with smart ways in which we can figure out how we can break the habits that, people have developed over time. Okay, a few years ago, it was really developed from COVID, right? So first one we're going to talk about, sleep.
That's right. Everyone's favorite.
Everyone's less favorite. Okay. So here we recommend, we're looking just primarily at adults here, so 18 years or older, 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Okay, these are the rough recommendation.
That's
Okay,
right.
it changes a little bit for everybody. Okay, and behavior change strategy. So consistent sleep-wake cycle, no screens 1 hour before bed, and dark, cool, calm sleep environment.
That's right.
Okay, is really important.
Yeah, and we'll kind of quickly just talk about why these are kind of important.
Yep.
So the no screens before 1 hour before bed, that has to do with the blue light, which I'm sure you're all aware of. Okay, so that can disrupt the melatonin in your body. Okay, which is important in the sleep onset and also quality of your sleep. So you want to prevent that circadian rhythm from being interrupted, essentially, your biological clock, your sleep cycle.
Yeah, and once you start developing your biological clock, that circadian rhythm, Sam was talking about, it really does make a huge difference. You really start falling asleep at the same time, waking up at the same time without really too much cues and demands.
That's right. And that's why also keeping a consistent sleep and wake schedule is also important, because that plays a role in that as well.
Yep.
With regards to the dark, cool environment, so Dave, what temperature would you recommend people keep it at?
Usually we're looking somewhere around 67 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's right.
I'm not too sure what that is in
16,
Celsius.
16 to 20
16,
degrees
there we go.
Celsius, which you
Yeah.
might think is a bit cold, but it's actually better to have a bit of a cool room and blankets than a warm room with no blankets. And the reason is that you want to keep the room kind of cool to mimic the natural decrease in body temperature that your body goes through on sleep onset. So you want to help promote that. Okay. The other thing is you want to make sure that the bedroom is used for sleep and intimate relations only. And the reason that is again, is because you want your brain to associate the bedroom with sleep. If you're in there doing, on your bed doing your work, or on your bed watching TV or whatever, or whatever else you're doing, it can disrupt that as well. So we appreciate that depending on individual circumstances that may not be possible. You have to use your bedroom for certain things. But if you're going to do that, first thing is try not to do it on your bed. So if you're working, we don't recommend doing your work on your bed. Put a desk, put a chair, small fold up, TV tray, whatever you have to do. That's the big thing. Okay.
You just want to create some separation, right, between, the like physical act of sleeping, right, and other stuff
That's
they do
right.
throughout the day. Oftentimes, a lot of people have problems and they start going to sleep and their mind starts running and racing. So in this case, we like to add in this journaling aspect or to-do list. So if you find it's difficult to fall asleep and you have all these thoughts going on in your head, just take a second, write it down, try and put it away as much as possible, try and forget about it, but just leave it that, okay, it's there for the morning. I can deal with it at that point in time.
That's right. And then the other thing we recommend is obviously engaging in regular physical activity, which obviously will make you more tired. And there's other aspects too. And we're going to touch a bit more on physical activity after.
Yeah, with one caveat there is like
Oh, right.
sometime if it's too close to bed and you're doing vigorous activity, you actually increase your body's awake cycle. So you might not want to do it like within the last like hour before bed. But adding a little bit more physical activity in, definitely a great way to go ahead and get a little bit sleepier.
100%. So before we move on to the next section, does anyone have any questions about sleep, the strategies, and our recommendations?
Pretty good.
Nope, perfect. And if
Okay.
something comes up, we can answer them at the end.
Absolutely.
All right. So next we're going to talk about physical activity, Dave's favorite thing.
Yeah, so
Let's do this.
This is a big one. So first, we're going to run through it quickly, just some terminology. So aerobic exercise refers to cardiovascular exercise, which stresses the heart and lungs. Resistance exercise stresses the muscular system. So it usually means that you have to lift something or move something that's relatively heavy through a range of motion, which that could include your body weight as well. Repetitions are what they sound. It's one rep or the action of doing something one time, and a set is a group of repetitions together. The last two things here are the really big components of it, which is progressive overload, meaning that over time, the body starts to adapt. So you also have to try and adapt with it. So if you start off doing something at one level, you can't continue doing it at the same level and expect results. And the exercise intensity is what helps to achieve this progressive overload. Okay. So at some points in time, you want to have something that's a little bit more intense. Sometimes you want to have something that's a little less intense. Okay. So we do need some variation within that.
That's right.
Okay, so our recommendation. So again, adults 18 plus years old, okay, 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity of aerobic exercise per week. Okay, so that's something where you start breathing a little bit heavier, talking a little bit less. So sometimes we'd like to use the talk test here where you can get about 4 words up to maybe about a sentence before you have to take a breath. That would indicate some sort of vigorous engagement of activity. Okay, and then the other recommendation is to engage in resistance exercise using the major muscle groups for at least 2 days per week.
Yeah, and these are all minimums, right? So if you want to do more, that's fine. Obviously, there's a fine line between doing too much because you don't want to overtrain either. But
Mhm.
if you're brand new beginner, I think this is a reasonable start. And if you are more advanced in your exercise age, then you probably know what you should be doing anyway.
Yeah, or at least
Generally,
have an idea of like the volume that you can handle, right?
that's right.
Yep.
Okay, so like I said, like Dave said, the minimum is 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity per week, aerobic activity, and then 2 days a week of resistance. Okay, and how you split those 2 days a week up as far as timings for sessions, generally we recommend 20 to 30 minutes of resistance training at a time, twice, so 2 to 3 times a week. Okay.
Good. And again, different behavior change strategies. So the big one here to me anyways is the first one is create weekly physical activity schedule. So I hear a lot of times, right? People are just too busy, you're at work, could be school, could be whatever, right? And they just run out of time. Personally, I like to do it right away in the morning before I go into work. That way I know, you pick up kids after work, you dinner, all that kind of stuff. You're exhausted by the end, right? You've gotten it in beforehand anyways. So to me, that seems to be the best time, but everybody's a little bit different, right?
Mhm.
But do try and create that schedule where you find it will be most likely to fit in with your daily life. We want it to fit in. We don't want it to be something that's too like aggressive or abrasive into your life itself.
And can you quickly touch, Dave, about the plan A, plan B, and why you do that?
Yeah,
I recommend that for
yeah.
people.
So I come up with three different plans. So plan A, plan B, plan C, right? So this is like ways in which, okay, we have our plan A. Like I might do like 30 minutes on the treadmill this morning, right? And you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm just not feeling it, right? So maybe you go to plan B. So maybe instead of 30 minutes, you go to 20 minutes, a little bit less intensity. Maybe something else is going on, or maybe you didn't quite get to it. So you're like, all right, I know I didn't get to this morning, but maybe I have like 20 minutes tonight, but I know I'm going to be more tired. So my plan C might be, okay, I'm going to do like a 20-minute walk on the treadmill versus like a 30-minute run in the
Mhm.
morning, right? So you come up with these different options in your head, usually just changing around volume or intensity a little bit so that you make sure you do get something in and you're not just like, forget it. I'm not going to do it at all.
That's exactly it. Yeah, because that happens frequently. And again, I've been guilty of it. I'm sure you
Yeah.
have as well, Dave.
Yeah.
Is that, there's just days where you're not feeling it. So having those other options is a great way to prevent you from just giving up
Yeah.
completely. Okay.
Absolutely. So you want to make sure you can track your progress. You can write this down. You can do it in numerous different strategies. We provide this physical activity tracker. There's also a mood section there to let you know how you feel. So it's a nice subjective addition to that as well too. We also want to make sure you warm up 5 to 10 minutes prior to activity. And again, we're practicing progressive overload. So once you feel like it's too easy, okay, there's ways and strategies in which you can adapt and make it a little bit harder.
And for the warm-ups, obviously, if you're going to be doing something that's going to involve your legs, you want to warm up that muscle group, right? Obviously, and there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do it. You can even do the exercise that you're planning on doing, just at a lower volume and
Yeah.
weight,
Yeah.
correct? And
Yeah.
resistance.
That's usually what I do is just kind of move through the patterns in which you're going to be moving through.
That's right.
Right.
And sometimes you can even do it without weight at all, just to get
Oh,
them, just to
absolutely.
get the movement, right? For example,
Yep.
I don't know what that was, but it was an exercise movement. All right, so
Reverse fly. We'll come up with
that's right.
something.
All right,
That was meant to be, meant
next
to happen.
part.
Okay, so wake up earlier or go to bed later to make time for physical activity. Again, these are just different strategies. Integrate active living strategy into your everyday lifestyle. Include your family or household occupants when making activity living or exercise changes. And this can be big too, right? And this even goes into our like NEAT that we're calling it. So the moving more, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So maybe you're just involving like your kids into, playing soccer a little bit or, going for a walk with your spouse, something like that, which helps to increase not only the social value, but then also the activity value as well too.
And the NEAT that Dave was mentioning, you may have also heard it referred to as active living strategies as well. So can you
Yeah.
give a couple of examples of what people can do for things like that,
For
Dave?
sure. Yeah. It could be something like, you're going to the grocery store and instead of parking close to the door, you're parking in the furthest parking spot away from it. Could be if you're doing laundry, maybe you make 1, 2, 3 more trips up and down the stairs, taking the laundry up and down the stairs. Simple things like that. We're just either kind of adding steps or adding movement into your normal daily life.
That's right. And I'm sure everyone's heard of that before. It's just trying to remember to integrate those into your life.
Yeah, it can really go a long, long ways. And surprising if anybody ever has any like which is common now, like pedometers or like step counters. When you start adding in, you're like, whoa, I actually walk quite a bit more than I thought I was going to. Okay. And obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to ask a professional.
That's right. Yeah, especially if you're a beginner and you're not sure where to start or what kind of exercises to do, reaching out to a professional like Dave is a good option.
Okay, now these are just again, they're up for resource.
Yeah.
We'll have them somewhere or not. But we we came up with this exercise routine. This is the strength component of it. There's 3 days. We can just kind of skip through
Okay,
here.
perfect.
And they give like a wide variety of different muscle groups that you can get into. Again, very simple. These come from a whole bunch of whether you're a beginner, okay, and again, we're kind of assuming that it's somebody without an injury. So if there is injury, if you have any pain kind of the joint area, you don't want to do it. Sometimes if there's this pain like the big fleshy areas, like the middle of your thigh or whatever, that could just be a muscle soreness from working. But assuming there's no injury or no contraindications, these are different variations that beginners do, all the way up to like professional athletes, right? Can go up to this with some sort of variation of it. So it's meant to engage the entire body. Okay. And again, it will be up for a resource.
Yeah,
at some point.
we'll find a way. Like I said, this is one of the resources I was talking about at the beginning. It'll either be online or we'll find a way to get an email to you. All right. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions about the behavior strategies and the recommendations for physical activity?
And
Okay.
the one other thing I was going to mention, for cardiovascular, usually the easiest way to start is just start walking.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So if you have 10 minutes, you just pick a direction, start walking for 5 minutes at a brisk pace.
Yep.
And then when you get to that 5 minutes, turn around and walk back. Like that's as easy as that,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
usually what I tell people to do is try and beat like how far they get back in the same time, right? So you're always trying to beat your distance just a little bit more. It's a great way to start.
It's a great recommendation for life in general.
Absolutely.
Always trying to improve, right? All right. So next, we're going to talk about some psychoactive substances. Like I said, we're only going to talk about cannabis, nicotine, and alcohol. Obviously, they all impact the central nervous system, and they all have short-term and long-term physical, cognitive, and psychological effects. How they affect individuals is also going to vary based on, their comfort with or how frequently they've used them or how long they've used them, body size, age. There's a whole bunch of factors. And then we're also realists, so we do understand, like I said, that used appropriately and in moderation, all of those substances can be pleasant and have positive effects, but we're going to be focusing on people who use it excessively or habitual use. Okay, so we broke the recommendations up into each kind of substance. So we're going to start with alcohol. So obviously the recommendation is no alcohol is what we recommend. Okay, that's the healthiest option. Okay, but again, we're also realists, so we understand that that's not as easy for everyone. So if you are going to drink alcohol, there's a couple things that we recommend. One, you want to aim for no more than 2 standard drinks per week. I know that sounds like not a lot. But that's where you aim for. Okay, we don't always hit the target right away, but you want to aim for that. So if you're drinking 10 currently a week, you in your brain you say, okay, I want to get to 2, then maybe you reduce it to 8 to start, right? So we'll talk about that part too, but that's where you're aiming for. The ultimate goal is 0, but if you want to still drink alcohol, then you want to shoot for no more than 2 per week. When you are drinking, you want to again strive to consume no more than 2 standard drinks per occasion. So essentially, we want to avoid binge drinking. That's the point of that.
The excessive amount.
Exactly. The other obvious recommendations is do not drive when you're using any of these, well, especially cannabis or alcohol. So don't drive, and using alcohol while you're pregnant or breastfeeding is also not recommended at all. So nicotine or cigarettes, okay, same thing. No, none is the recommendation. Okay. We also don't generally recommend the use of e-cigarettes. But if you're going to use them as a cessation aid, then we think that's a reasonable option. Okay, so if you are trying to go from cigarettes to no cigarettes, but you're having a hard time, then switching to e-cigarettes can be used as a cessation aid. Obviously, nicotine use of any kind during pregnancy is discouraged, and no exposure to secondhand smoke is safe. So obviously, you want to prevent that as much as possible. And then finally, cannabis. Okay. So again, the healthiest option is no use at all. Okay. But if you are going to use it, here are some recommendations. So you want to, if you're younger than 20, you want to not use it. Essentially, you want to delay your use until you're at least 20 years old. And the reason for that is that it's been demonstrated to negatively impact the developing brain. Okay. Particularly if you have a history of severe mental illness in your family, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, psychosis, things like that. It has been shown to trigger that in some individuals. So just to prevent that completely, we recommend not doing it until you're 20. And if you do actually have a family history of psychosis or schizophrenia, it's actually recommended that you not use it at all, but let your conscience be your guide. If you are going to use cannabis, we do recommend low THC content and high CBD to THC ratios. So CBD is the one of the components, and that's actually has some medicinal benefits. It's used for anti-inflammatory products and things like that. THC is a psychoactive component, so you want to have good ratios with that. And again, you want to use low content THC. Obviously, use while you're pregnant is discouraged. And if you are going to use it, we do recommend that you limit it to 1 day per week or less. Again, that's what you're aiming for, right? So if you can't hit that, then just slowly reduce until you get to that if you can. Don't drive when you're under the influence of this. And then again, like I mentioned, if you do have a family history of psychosis or schizophrenia, just be careful using this medication or this substance. It can be a medication. That's why I mentioned that. Okay.
It can be.
So we'll just quickly touch on some strategies that you can use to reduce your use. Okay. Again, these are split up into some substance specific stuff and then some general stuff. And a lot of this is they are interconnected. So you can apply the recommendations, basically generally all of them. But so with alcohol, you want to set a limit and stick with it. So the reason that's important is that if there's scenarios where you're going to encounter where you're going to need to be exposed to alcohol and you don't really want to drink a lot, you want to make sure you set a limit before and stick with it. All right. The other thing is drink beverages slowly. So, you know, nurse that beer or drink as long as you can. And then the other trick is kind of drink non-alcoholic beverages between each alcoholic beverage. That's a good way to do it. All right. If you're not sure of your basically your status with substances, like, so for example, if you don't feel you have an issue or you know, or anything like that, then what we recommend is taking like a vacation or a break. You can either do a few weeks or a month and see how you do. You know, do you have any withdrawal symptoms? Do you have any severe cravings? Is it negatively impacting your mood? That's a big one. So if you are, if these things are happening, then you may want to, you know, take a closer look at your use and consider reducing it if possible,
Yeah.
or stopping it completely if needed.
And these are kind of what we call biofeedback markers, right?
Mhm.
That, you know, if mood starts to either negatively change because, you know, you don't have the alcohol or the substance or vice versa, it could be an indicator that your body is relying upon it, right? And those are kind of things that we want to be able to identify. Okay, is kind of where they're going. The other thing we had mentioned before is a part of the dopamine reward system, right?
Mhm.
So the habitual aspect of this. So if you are having those behavior changes, and if that's now becoming part of this dopamine reward system, like I go out socially and I have to have like 5 beers or whatever it might be in order to hit that response, that could be a problem, right? And so changing some of the habits that are related to that can be advantageous to helping breaking that habitual cycle, right?
That's correct. Perfect. All right, nicotine specific. So again, if you are trying to reduce your use, you want to set a limit and stick with it. So if you smoke 10 cigarettes and you're going to try to get to nothing, we don't actually recommend going from 10 cigarettes a day to 0 because that rarely works. There are some individuals where cold turkey works, but generally that's not the case. So
Yep.
we actually recommend a slow reduction or using some of the nicotine replacement options that are available. So Niagara North Family Health Team does have a stop smoking cessation program. So if that's something you want to do, then make sure you contact your primary care provider to get set up with that program. Another thing you want to do is use distraction to manage your cravings. And that can be for all of these substances as well. That should probably be in the general one, but
Yeah.
And what's one of the best ones for it? Physical activity. All right.
It's like the golden
Yeah.
like bullet or whatever the saying is,
Yep.
right? If there's one magic pill, like physical activity tends to be as close as we have
Mhm.
to that.
That's right. You want to also change the behaviors that you associate with smoking. So there's a huge nicotine is addictive, but there's also a very strong behavioral component to that addiction as well. So for example, if you're a smoker and you generally, in the morning you get up, you have your coffee, cigarette at the kitchen table. If you're trying to reduce your nicotine use, what you want to do is either have a different beverage. So sit at the table, have a cigarette, but have a tea, or take your coffee and your cigarette and go outside. You want to change the behavior itself.
Yeah. Just start breaking some of those components up, right?
Mhm.
And then that can change the habitual response.
That's right. It makes it easier to reduce. And then general strategies. Oh, there it is again. Physical activity. So that's one of the big
Just
ones.
keeps coming up.
Okay. There's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the most common things that is in the research, and also, I mean, I've experienced this, and I'm sure you have as well, Dave,
Mhm.
is that once you start to make positive behavior changes. So let's say you start, exercising regularly, it changes how you feel.
Yeah.
So you feel a bit more confident, and you actually you generally have reduced cravings for the unhealthy things. And you may find the big one with me is the connection between healthy foods and physical activity. So when when I'm pretty consistent with physical activity, I tend to not crave sweets and junk food as much, right? You still do, obviously, because everything in moderation,
Yeah,
right?
at some points you do.
Yeah.
It's actually crazy how addictive feeling good is,
Yes.
right? And once you start down that cycle, and once you start going backwards, and you feel like, maybe I'll eat this junk food, or I'll sleep for 4 hours or whatever it might be, and then you start feeling bad. You're like, oh, like I don't want to do that again,
Yeah.
right? So it is actually very addictive to feel good.
And that's also a good example of how an extrinsic motivational drive
Yeah.
can switch to an intrinsic. So you may start the behavior change because, for a reward of improved health or things like that.
Yeah.
But then you may find once you start doing physical activity or sleeping normal hours,
Yeah.
you're doing it because you enjoy it, right?
Yeah, you really do feel so much better with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it does help to stimulate that dopamine reward system.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure that you have a plan for temptation. So I kind of mentioned that with the alcohol one. So if you are going to an event, a retirement party, an anniversary, a wedding, birthday party, where there's going to be these substances available, and you're trying to either reduce or abstain, then you do need to have a plan. So don't just show up, and think you're going to make it up on the day, because generally that's not the best way to do it. We don't recommend that. So have a general plan. Again, don't be too hard on you if you sway from it on yourself, if you sway from it a bit, but we'll talk about that at the end, how to prevent that as well. Make sure that you focus on changing one behavior change at a time. So if you're not exercising, you aren't sleeping very well, and you're using substances, you want to pick one of those things to change first. Don't try to do it all at the same time, okay? Because it can become overwhelming, and it reduces your chances of success. And you're better off to have a bunch of small successes over time that increases your likelihood to continue with positive behavior change. But if you try to do it all at once, often people will become overwhelmed and will be unsuccessful or revert to their old habits. Okay. I don't like to use the term unsuccessful.
Revert backwards.
Yeah. And then last is make sure that you're reducing these things slowly. Like I mentioned, especially substances. Okay. So nicotine, alcohol, cannabis. Again, we don't recommend stopping cold turkey, especially alcohol, because that can be dangerous, which brings me on to the next slide. So if you're having trouble reducing or stopping a substance. So if you find, like I said, you took a vacation or you're trying to reduce on your own and you're finding that you're having significant cravings, significant mood changes, then you may need to seek professional assistance. So that's where your primary care provider can be very helpful. There's a lot of programs in this area for addiction. So everyone's heard of AA. There's the rapid, I can't remember what it's called. The RAM Clinic essentially is what it's called. It's a rapid access to addictions program. And then there's also CASON. There's a whole bunch of different addiction services available in this area. So there is help available. Okay. And then, like I said, Niagara North has the Stop Smoking program as well. Particularly with alcohol or even cannabis. If you find that you either have chest pain, if you're trying to reduce substance use, at any point you get any chest pain, shortness of breath, psychosis, seeing things, hearing things, obviously you're going to seek emergency medical services right away. Call 911 if you have to, but that's what you have to do. Okay. And then lastly this is the one that is hard to talk about with individuals because they don't like to deal with it sometimes. But if you've made the decision to try to either stop substance use or reduce use, and there's people in your life that are either encouraging you to do it or trying to discourage you from doing those things, then you have to have a serious talk with yourself and, and reconsider those people in your life or their role in your life. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to, befriend them or anything like that, but you may have to change the way you interact with them. And then unfortunately, there are times where you may have to break off relationships with people because they can just be that toxic, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, anyone who is not encouraging you or helping you to improve, it really doesn't have a place in your life anyway. Okay. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions about substances with regards to our recommendations or the strategies? All right.
Okay, good.
Moving on.
Moving
We're
forward.
good?
Yep.
All right. Dave, you have any questions? No. Okay. All right. So
Social media.
yeah.
This is an interesting one. Okay. Obviously, it's a little bit more of a new area, newer topic. But again, we're looking back here at just how it impacts our overall habits. So the average Canadian spends about 2 hours a day on social media. So that's not just devices, that's social media alone. Okay. Social media posts are deliberately crafted to depict versions of reality the content creator wants you to see. So this is a great example. Take it seriously.
Yeah, it's a great example. So a couple of years ago, there was a trend that was going on social media where influencers were posting photos of what the typical kind of photos they would post, and then photos of, candid photos of themselves that are more like the reality. So I liked that when that was going around because it is unfortunately one of the negative impacts of social media is that, like the Apple picture here as well, is what you're seeing is what the creator or the person who's posting wants you to see, but it's not the reality. Okay. So, and we all know this intrinsically, like generally we know this, but when you're exposed to it over and over and over and over, unfortunately, it often leads to unrealistic social comparison, body image dissatisfaction, and things like that.
And we see this a lot in the physical fitness and activity world. So one thing is, like, when you're trying to change something, trying to change a habit, trying to change how you look, trying to change your health, it takes time. It takes a very long time for these things to happen. And so I find that people tend to look on social media, they'll see, hey, this guy's lifting like 400 pounds. I want to do that, but I haven't lifted at all in my lifetime, right? And I want to happen like 3 weeks from now. So it's like, it's the time factor that goes into it and understanding probably what these people have done, along with they're also looking at what they want you to see,
Right.
not the background, the basis behind it, how it happened, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You don't know what kind of training experience they have. You don't know, there's also genetic, there's a whole bunch of things, right?
That go into it.
All right. So social media recommendations. So, oh wait, there aren't any.
0.
So the only available guidelines really that, to my knowledge, unless there's something out there that I haven't seen, generally speaking, they're focused more on childhood safety uses, which again is a great thing, but doesn't really help us from a behavior change aspect. The only kind of guideline that I found was that they recommend no more than 30 minutes a day on social media. And for a lot of people, again, I was saying to Dave, including myself, because I use it for work sometimes, is that I generally do go over 30 minutes, right? So just be aware of how much you're using it. And a good way to check that is most social media apps actually have a setting where you can see your usage, all right, to keep track of that. So,
And this really works just along the same lines of any other addictive thing is it runs on that dopamine reward system where, you get a like, you'll be like, oh, I gotta check this. Yay, I got more likes, right? And that reinforces the habit, right? And kind of like what you were saying too is like if you want to know are you having a problem with it, try and take a vacation from it.
yeah,
See what happens.
exactly.
Right?
All right, so we will talk about, so for the purposes of this webinar, our kind of recommendation would be try to aim for less than 30 minutes a day if possible, okay? And then we're going to talk about some strategies that you can use to get there. All right.
So, like we said, minimize time on social media, turn off your phone a couple hours before bed, delay accessing social media until after 10 a.m., and turn off your notifications. So the interesting here is like accessing social media after 10 a.m. because a lot of people like wake up, boom, right away and get into it. So why do we want to look at after 10 a.m.?
Yeah, so we want to use the morning. The morning should be used for output. So for example, you want to use the mornings for creative stuff, expending energy, activity, writing, journaling, that kind of, or even your work. And then the evenings we generally recommend for the input. So that would be for, reading, watching TV a little is okay too, and social media. So generally that's what you want to do. You want to postpone how long you're on, like postpone the time before you get on social media. And what that also does is that also reduces the time you spend on social media. So if you're checking it first thing when you get up, you're likely to spend more than 30 minutes a day. Yep. But if you postpone it to 10, you may not, because you even if you checked it at 10 o'clock, most people at work, generally speaking, at that time. So, if they want to check it quick to see if they have any likes or whatever, but then most people while they're working can't check it, right? So
yeah.
I know I can't. So
yeah,
and it's not just because my boss is listening to this, but no,
because I don't really do it.
Yeah. No. All right. So that's kind of the reasoning why we recommend doing that. Oh, and I'm dropping papers here.
Yeah.
The other thing is notifications. So like Dave mentioned, so obviously notifications are designed to get you to check your social media. So if you want to reduce the amount of time you spend on social media, you want to make sure your notifications are turned off. The only time really you should have notifications turned on if it's for, something super important for, job or if you have kids that are out and they need to get a hold of you or something like that. But other than that, I mean, you should be checking it on your own time and not at the whim of your social media app.
And there really is like a psychological component to it too. Is as soon as you get notified, you're like, oh no, I have to do it. Right? Like it's there to make you do it, right?
100%. And turning off the phone. So for this one, we said 2 hours as opposed to the screens. That's more of screens kind of within 1 hour. But 2 hours is for a couple of reasons. One, for the blue light as well, but also just because you don't want to. So what if you turn on social media and you see something that makes you upset or things like that? That's also going to negatively impact your sleep. So there's a bunch of reasons for why we recommend shutting it off 2 hours before. Let's see. Yes, and then with regards to apps themselves, in addition to notifications having them turned off, if you do find you're one of those people who, if your app is on your home screen, feels the urge to click it, then we recommend either deleting the app completely and going through the browser to have to access it, or at the very least, take it off of your home screen and leave it in the kind of list of all the 1,000 apps that you have to search for. So it just makes it less likely that you're going to access it, right? Or at least a little more difficult to access it. So that's one way to do it.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, like, we kind of talked about this before as well, too, but take temporary breaks from social media. Again, just allows you as a self-check to see how addicted you are to it.
That's right.
Hopefully not at all.
Yeah, and then if you are going to be out with individuals, and I'm sure everyone has seen this, I know I have, is that, you're at a restaurant or something, you look over and there's a bunch of people at a table and they're all looking at their phone. So, one, as a society thing, we should all be encouraging people to not do that. But from a health standpoint, that's also not good for relationship building and maintenance and things like that. So if you are with people, prioritize face-to-face connections, especially with with kids. If you have kids,
Mhm.
you know, we often don't think about what that our kids are paying attention to that, but obviously they are. Okay, we all know that they're essentially basically mirrors of us, right? So we want to prevent that looking at those apps and social media and stuff in front of our children, especially.
Another good way is to start podcasts with somebody.
Yeah, that's fun too.
There
Yeah.
you go. Right.
Keeps you
Just for
keeps you
kids.
honest.
Yeah.
So before we move on, does anyone have any questions with regards to the social media recommendation? Because there's really only one that we found, and the strategies to change that. No? Okay, right on. No worries. So we're going to touch on the goals and how to create goals for yourself. And again, like at the beginning, I mentioned, I'm certain that whoever signed up for this, you probably had some ideas in your head about what kind of goals you were hoping for. But we're going to talk about how to set it, and we did it in kind of a step-by-step way. So obviously, the first step is examining your current behaviors. So comparing them to what the recommendations are. And like I said, or taking breaks and seeing how you respond with regards to the substances and things like that. Or you can even do, if you're not sure of your physical fitness level, to see if you need to improve that. I mean, most people, I always think I can improve physically, but if you're not sure, you can always seek out the help of a professional, and they can run you through kind of tests that they can do in their office and let you know where what your baseline is. And that's also good too, because you can use that to gauge your improvement with time. All right. So that's the first step. Second step, did I skip a step there? I may have, yes, I did. I skipped a step. Sorry, too quick. Second step, you want to consider the impact of your current behaviors on your physical and mental health. So are they contributing to your current medical conditions? Are they negatively impacting your education, your work? Are they causing financial struggles with regards, like, for example, substance use and things like that? Are your behaviors negatively impacting your personal, employment, work relationships, or romantic relationships? These are things to consider. And then step 3 is setting the SMART goal. And we're using the SMART goal. There's a whole bunch of different ways to set it. This is the one that we usually recommend, because it's good for long-term behavior change. Okay.
So SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Okay. So what we mean by that is you want to be as specific as you can into what it is that you want to accomplish. So say, for example, you want to do push-ups, right? Say you want to be able to do 10 push-ups. Okay. That's very specific. Okay. Measurable. How do we know when you meet the goal? Obviously, if you complete your specific recommendation that you wanted to have. So if I can do 10 push-ups, I met my goal. It's attainable. So
Do you have a shoulder injury?
yeah, this is where we kind of get into okay, think about like what Sam said, like if you have a shoulder injury, like where am I at? Have I ever done push-ups before? Okay, this also kind of goes into the realistic aspect of it as well too. If you've never done a push-up or you have a shoulder injury, maybe you can't really start on the ground and do 5 push-ups. Maybe you have to start on a wall and start there and progress. Okay. And again, timely, I kind of touched on this earlier. A lot of people want things to happen right away. It takes quite a bit of time for things to happen. With regards to physical activity alone, okay, you want to think usually you can do something, get somewhere small within 8 to 12 weeks.
That's right.
Okay, so it's a couple months. We're thinking months here, and we're thinking long-term change, not quick off the bat, 2 weeks, and then I'm good to go. Okay, it does take time for these things to happen.
Yep, 100%. And then, like you mentioned, is it realistic, right?
Yeah.
So, is the goal worth working hard to accomplish? Is it even relevant? Like we mentioned, okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And does it fit into your lifestyle?
Yeah.
Right.
And then finally, step 4 of the goal making process would be applying the strategies that we kind of recommended or discussed with to your goal. So, for example, if you want to improve your sleep, go back. I believe this will be available. Go back and look at the recommendations that we did for behavior change. So, and try to apply some of those things to improve your sleep. All right.
Hmm.
And then we kind of did this. So I'll go back to this page here. So let's pick another example. We'll run through one. Oh, what's a good one? So we did the push-ups. What's another one we could do? Like cigarettes, I guess.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
could say like alcohol or cigarette
Yeah.
like cessation,
So yeah,
things like
so
that.
let's say this is just an example, obviously, okay? So I'm setting a goal. Let's say I smoke, I always use 10 just because it's just the way I do
Easy
it. So
numbers.
let's say I smoke 10 cigarettes a day, okay? So my specific goal would say I want to go from 10 cigarettes a day to no cigarettes a day, and I want to do that in a week. Okay. So that's pretty specific. And I've talked about the timely part of it, right? So then I have to go through the other part of it. So is it measurable? So obviously, if I get to zero, then I've met my goal. And right. So that's how I've measured it, my success. Is it attainable? Well, that's a good question. So that all depends on a bunch of factors. And is it realistic? I think that's the more important thing. So you need to look at it that way. So is it realistic to say, let me add that I've been smoking 10 cigarettes a day for 40 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So is it realistic that I'm going to go from smoking 10 cigarettes a day for 40 years to zero in 1 week? Is it possible? Sure. Anything's possible. But is it likely that I'm going to maintain that change? It's not likely. Right. So that's what we're talking about when you're setting these goals. We actually encourage you to set smaller goals. So maybe a better goal for that would have been a better specific goal would say, I want to go from smoking 10 cigarettes a day to 9 cigarettes a day. And I want to consistently do that for a week.
Yeah, that's pretty
Right.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and take in consideration your environment as well too, right? If
Yeah.
you're in a household where everyone else smokes, it's going to be extremely hard
Hmm.
to kind of get there, right? So you may have to take other steps to it as well.
Yeah. So that's kind of why it's important to use this SMART kind of setup, because it's not just as easy as saying, oh, I wanted to do this by this day, right? You have to kind of look at the other aspects of it, like you
Be
mentioned.
specific, take the environment into consideration, right?
Right.
And set like a reasonable time frame.
Yeah. Okay.
Good.
So does anyone have any questions about goal creation or SMART goals specifically? Oh, somebody raised their hand. Okay. How do I do that?
Click
So
view.
Tammy, are you able to turn your mic on at all or no?
Click view. There you
Oh,
go.
or I can click view. Let me see here. Oh, I can do it for you, I think.
Yeah.
Here, one sec. Ask to unmute.
Okay.
Go for it.
I have been following this sort of healthy eating, whatever,
Mhm.
website called MyFitnessPal. And one of the discussions that I've seen people engaging in on there is has to do with the idea that more important than motivation is discipline, and that discipline will produce results that will lead to motivation more so than the other way around. I just wonder if you
Mhm.
have thoughts about that idea, which I think is sort of interesting, but I'm not really sure I mean,
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
the people attending this are motivated because we're here.
Right.
Yeah.
But I wonder anyway what you think about the
Yeah.
discipline
Go
thing.
for it, Dave.
So it really works in like there's no straight lines with this. It kind of works in like a cyclical like cycle, right? So you're not going to do anything unless you have the motivation to start doing something. Okay. But then once you have the discipline, which you could kind of use in terms of us as far as like our habit change, right? That habit change then starts to produce discipline, which reinforces the motivation. This is kind of where we were going with like the extrinsic motivation, how it then eventually turns into intrinsic motivation and continues from there.
Yeah.
Right. So it's starting the habits, which creates the discipline, which helps to then create the overall change in health and the differences in motivation.
Yeah, and I guess this will maybe also answer. Catherine had a chat here. She wrote, "What about issues less measurable? So measurable. So, for example, confidence, depression, things like that." So, yeah, that's a good point. It's a really good point, and I bring this up with patients all the time. Actually, is that, and Dave and I have talked about this as well. Is most people generally know what their bad habits are. Like, you know what I mean? Most people understand that, but a lot of people struggle with two things. One, what strategies do I use to change it? But the other important aspect is do I have the motivation slash confidence slash, willpower to do it? So here's the hard reality of it, unfortunately, is that the initial parts of it are difficult. it's difficult to do, and sometimes it sucks, right? So for example, if so regardless of any lifestyle behavior change, one of the ones that like Dave mentioned it twice that I'm a big believer in it is physical activity. And again, it doesn't mean you have to go to a gym. You don't have to start, becoming a marathon runner. Just regular, consistent, starting very slow, simple physical activity. Um, that usually sucks at the beginning. Okay. So because usually, unfortunately, because of life and because of the way that things are, is that we usually have to do it in times that aren't as appealing. So for example, you either have to get up early, especially if you have children, things like that, or other responsibilities, is you have to either get up early to do it or do it late in the evening. And that's usually not fun. But what happens is as you do that consistently, this kind of goes back to the original kind of question there, is it once you do it consistently, it does kind of create a discipline that becomes what's the word, not kind of pleasurable. Like you start to look forward to it, and not because of the activity itself. I say that what I always say is even to this day, I've been exercising my whole life. I hate exercising. I hate it.
Yeah, it's
But I love how I
the
feel
outcomes.
after. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. So once you realize that that's always going to be the case, so after you've done this activity, even though you don't want to do it to start, once you accomplish it, you'll feel so good that you'll want to do it again. So that's kind of, and like Dave said, it is kind of cyclical, right? And it's going to be the same for all of the things we talked about. I use physical activity because I think that's one of the easiest ones for people to relate to.
Mhm.
And I think it's also one of the, if you don't know where to start there, because that will impact all of the other things we talked about, especially sleep. And then usually substance use too, because the other thing is too, with certain substances, oftentimes people will do them in the evening. So if you're exercising regularly, you're going to be more tired. You're going to go to sleep usually earlier. You're not going to have as much time to do these other substances, things like that. So it's all connected. So there's no 100% answer, I would say. And everybody's going to be different. With regards to like specifically depression, then I would for sure recommend physical activity because there's been lots of research on that, actually, the positive impacts of mental health.
When we're looking at measuring things like that, though,
Mhm.
like confidence,
Mhm.
self-confidence, depression, so forth, I would look at the like biofeedback markers after that. So say
Right.
like, because it maybe lack of self-confidence, you don't want to go with your friends or something like that. I would look at that as being more of a like a measurable type goal.
Mhm.
And the more that you get applied to that, then the more that starts coming around and
Right.
so forth, right? So
And it goes back to that original when we were talking about setting your goal. So asking that
yeah,
question, what are the benefits of achieving this goal going to be? So if
yeah,
you're self-conscious and you don't like to go out because you don't like the way you look, or
yeah.
you things like that, then yes, those, like you said, those biofeedback markers, you'll be more confident. You'll want to do those things. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how that works, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answered your question, but we tried. Does anyone have any other questions with regards to that? And if you are, and if somebody's really struggling with depression, okay, so the just because that was one of the questions here, is there's kind of three things that I recommend. So one would be make sure you talk to your provider about it. All right, because generally the recommendations for it are behavior change, because a lot of times, unfortunately, is I wouldn't say it's like is it chicken or the egg type thing. I don't say that bad. I wouldn't say that bad habits cause depression, but they definitely don't help, right? So if you're able to slowly change some of your behaviors to more positive behaviors, then that has been shown and demonstrated in literature to improve depressive symptoms, right? Sometimes medication is required, so I wouldn't say never consider medication, but I'm not a big, I would never recommend someone just take medication and not address the other aspects, like for example, their habits, counseling, things like that. So, but if you are struggling to get the motivation because of depression, and and you're not able to start, then you may want to consider medication. But again, talk with your provider about that. All right. Yep. And next slide, if I can click it. All right. So this is just the final slides. We're just going to talk about some final strategies and tips for everyone. Okay. So the first thing is, like I mentioned a billion times, is focus on changing one behavior at a time. So don't try to do it all because you can be overwhelming and will often result in
Small wins.
yes, small wins. Okay. So next, start small, go slow. So like Dave mentioned, it took you a long time to develop these bad habits. So it's going to take a long time to revert to good habits. So don't be too hard on yourself and don't be too unrealistic with regards to your goal setting. Like we mentioned again, consistency is the key. Okay. So that's where having those
different plans come into
plans
play,
are super
right?
important.
Yeah. Think it through a little bit. I think 3 plans are great. You can have as many as you want, but it really helps with consistency.
Yeah, 100%. And resist that voice in your head. So this is Dave always makes fun of me, but he gets it. So maybe I'm the only one, but cartoons, you have the devil and the angel. Okay. So there's always going to be, especially this usually happens when you've had some success in making behavior change or when you're struggling or you're going through things. So you may find that, let's say you want to start going for a walk 5 days a week. That's your goal. That's pretty hefty goal, but let's say that's your goal. And you've done 3 days consistently. What'll happen sometimes is on that fourth morning, say you do it in the morning, you'll wake up and you'll have in your head, you'll have that little voice that goes, you know what? You've been really good. You've done 3 days. You're tired. Why don't you just skip today and go tomorrow? Okay. That's going to happen. It does happen all the time. So what we want you to do is try your best to avoid that voice in your head and push through. And that's again why having those backup plans is important. So if you and you can use backup plans for all of these things, right? Like it doesn't have to be just for physical activity. So yeah, so if in your head you're like, yeah, I don't really feel like it, at the very least, so I'm just using getting up early for an example to go for a walk. At the very least, I would say get out of bed at the very least. Okay. Even if you don't do the physical activity, but if you just lie in bed and go back to sleep, that's what we don't want you to do because that's unfortunately, how easy it is to slip back into old behaviors.
Yeah.
All right.
And to go along with that, nothing happens in a straight line, right? So you're going to have points where you're going to have things that are going to get better, things that are going to kind of start to decrease again, and things are going to get back on track again. So, just kind of stick with it. Again, consistency is important.
Yeah. And then, so to add to that, the second last point here is don't be hard on yourself because there are going to be times where you do revert to old behaviors or you're unsuccessful with a small goal that you had set. Don't be hard on yourself. You're not the first or last person to ever not be successful with that. But what we recommend is if that happens, acknowledge that you were unsuccessful or made a mistake in your plan, and then just start back where you were. Okay. So and again, I get that that's easier said than done. I appreciate that. But just constantly reminding yourself, even writing that on your kind of goal chart or whatever, or goal board, they just say, don't be too hard on yourself. Like, take it easy on yourself. And then finally, start now. All right. Just do it because like Shia LaBeouf says, because there's no, Monday isn't going to be better than today. So you don't have to wait until Monday. Everybody likes to do that is they're like, oh, I'll start my behavior change on Monday. Right. Sure. I get it. But there's no good time to start. There's no time that's better than the other. So just do it. All right. If you have a goal or something you want to change, set your goal, set your strategy with using the recommendations, and then just get to it. All right. So finally, any questions about any of it or any other kind of questions?
No, and we just see that you got the link up there for the resources.
Yeah, so the recording and the resources will be posted on the website. Yeah, so I'll make sure that I get the resources to Alicia so she can get them up there. And then and we'll take it from there. And if anybody has any questions, like I said, make sure you reach out to professionals if you need help with any of this stuff. And we hope that you got a little bit out of it. I know it was fast and furious. I mean, the reality is that each of these sessions we could talk an hour on easy. So it's a lot of information in a short time, but hopefully you got a little bit out of it. So
good. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And everybody take care and good luck with your journey. And I know you guys can all be successful. All right. All right. Take care.
Thanks now.
Thank you.